Did you guys have a good week and weekend? Anybody do anything extra fun? I think once you get over 16 years old or so, um, not everything qualifies as being super fun anymore. Oh well. And if Aaron and Rihanna, if either of you have working cameras, it would be awesome to be able to see you too. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Last night, my class, one of the students, I like having the cameras on because it makes me feel like I'm speaking to actual living human beings. And last night, one of my classes, a person was running around inside of a gymnasium with their camera down at stomach level. So I was watching all the girders move around, and it reminded me of being on a roller coaster. I just started getting really sick. But if you're not doing that, please feel free to put your camera on. All righty. Today, there are a couple of things I'm interested in doing, and and I would like to hear from you guys as to what, questions and things like that as well. The three things that I really want to do is I want to talk about the artist research slash service learning sections. Then I want to look at the discussion for people's houses that they turned in and talk about those. And the third thing is I want to look at the next assignment cluster, which is uh, structure with the skin. And if that's all right with you guys, that's what we're going to go ahead and do. Hey, Polly,
Hello.
that's what we're going to do. But before we start any of that, one thing that I really wanted to reiterate is something that I'm probably going to uh, talk about every class period, which is there is absolutely no reason for anybody not to get a perfect score. And I wanted to go over the steps you take to make sure that you get as many points as possible. One is make sure you turn stuff in. Uh, when I'll go through after an assignment is due and I'll put a zero in if something hasn't been turned in. I just write a note saying, please submit for points. And that is designed to trigger Canvas to remind you, hey, you've got this assignment due. And it's I'm pretty sure I told you guys a story about the young man who thought he was going to fail the class, and then he just turned in the stuff that he hadn't been able to turn in, and he got an A, ended up getting an A minus. And that I I want everybody to be mindful of that because there's no reason just to give up. Uh, if you are in a position where you're feeling overwhelmed with all the classes and all the things that you do, uh, there is the accommodations office on campus, and they're really responsive and helpful with students. Um, One of the things that I really like about UVU is every single faculty person I've met, everyone in the administration, everybody else that I've met making decisions at UVU, their principal interest is the success of the students. And I've taught at a number of other schools, and that's not always the case, honestly. There are sometimes departments that are really uh, dedicating themselves to getting a certain bell curve of grading spreads. So if you don't quite make it, that's your unfortunate luck. And other schools where people are so ego driven that they can't see, past their own um, good thoughts about themselves to make actually decent and intelligent choices. And neither of those things are true at UVU. I hope people haven't had bad experiences here. I've been teaching here for about 6 years, and my experiences have consistently been very positive in that relationship between students and teachers. So, but If you have turned in things and you're not getting a perfect score, then look at the comments that I say. And if I don't have a comment, if you're just missing a couple of points, um, email me and talk to me about it. Let me know why. A couple of uh, assignments that are turned in for some of the projects sometimes may not be entirely up to snuff, or it may not be what I think is should be as illustrative of the student's full potential, or it may be that I know you're an artist and it wasn't really applied. If I don't say that, look at our class discussions and definitely email me and say, hey, how can I make that up that last couple points? And then I'm happy to talk to you about it. I have done Zoom calls or FaceTime people stuff with people. I don't mind doing that at all. I think that we need to do that, and it's my responsibility to keep flexible uh, in changing scores and things like that because we don't have the typical uh, in-person interaction like we would if we were meeting twice a week on campus. So I think it's important for me to do that, but it's also important for you not to give up on yourself and not to get your nose bent out of shape, but to just ask about it if I'm not explicit as to why. I the discussions, for example, several people just got half points, and the only reason they got half points is because they hadn't made um, comments following the directions on the discussion for 3 other students yet. And that's once you do that, email me, let me know, and we'll take care of it. One of the things that I've noticed is it is important when you do submit or resubmit something rather, if I'm not changing the grade, email me about it and email me either online through my campus email or through Canvas using the email tool in Canvas. Don't communicate with me in the discussion thing for the assignment because for whatever reason that is not getting to me. There is supposed I have it set up so it's supposed to trigger some sort of a notification, but I'm not seeing those notifications, and we can't figure out why. So uh, there has been a couple times where somebody finally did text me and say, "Hey, why haven't you regraded my thing?" Because they added an addendum in the discussion for the assignment. Well, I never saw that because I don't get a notice about those discussions. And they thought by repeatedly talking to me through the discussion, I would get that. And it really that's why it's so important to email me. If I'm asking you to email me, use the actual email feature on your computer box thing and email me. Uh, so anyway, blah blah blah. Now I want to But before we go on to the next segment, does that make sense to everybody? Do you guys understand that? Do you guys get that? Okay. All right, great. All right, now you guys are seeing my screen. This is Module 7A. And I hope everybody understands. Everybody has to do the artist list. What I am appreciating is when I've asked this artist research or service learning, almost everybody has done that. And if you'll notice, I go through, if you chose artist research, I've gone through and removed your name from all the service learning options. And if you chose service learning, I've gone through and removed your name from all the artist research option assignments. Has anybody noticed that or seen that? Okay. It's important that if you haven't done that yet, do it as soon as you possibly can. And again, whichever path you've picked, you're only responsible for the assignments in that path when there's an option. And this is an option: artist research option, service learning option. If we go down to module 7B, you see artist research option, service learning, service learning. So I don't want anybody feel like they need to do more work than they actually have to. So it is really important that you fill out, or you let me know, artist, researcher, service learning, so I can take you off of the other path so you don't feel like you need to do that. Does everybody feel like they understand that? Okay, good. All righty then. If anybody has any questions about that, please let me know. And uh, if you're not on this call when you have the question, please email the question to me so I can address it in at our next class so that everybody can benefit. I used to tell a story when I taught at BYU. I told a story that I think is really applicable. Um, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I am on the spectrum. My brain is like a pachinko machine, and a lot of the times you're only hearing like a quarter or a tenth of the conversations I'm having with you inside of my head. As I and these conversations, like Aaron is always really sarcastic, and Brittany is comes across as being pleasant, but she really keeps me on my toes, and that's what's going on inside my head. But the story that I would tell at BYU is once upon a time there was a bird that had missed flying south for the winter, and he'd stay behind. He was getting really super cold. He was getting colder and colder and colder, and he thought, okay, finally, I'm going to go ahead and join up with everybody else. Started flying south, but it just got so cold. He dropped out of the sky. He was freezing to death, and he landed in a farmer's field. Well, as he's sitting there shivering, a cow comes up, kind of sniffs him, realizes what's going on. She turns around and poops on him. And he's thinking, oh, this is horrible. And then he thinks, oh, wait a second. It's like being in a sauna because it's so warm, and his life was saved. And a little while later, a cat comes up and says, hey, do you like smelling like poop? Do you like being covered with poop? And the bird thinks about it and says, no, not really. And the cat says, well, let me clean you off. So the cat pulls the little bird out of the poop, goes over to the pond, washes all the poop off the bird. And the bird just has enough time to say, oh, thank you. And then the cat eats him. The moral of the story is just because somebody dumps on you doesn't make them your enemy. And just because somebody pulls you out doesn't make them your friend. So if you are asking me a question or whatever, and I respond to it in the video for the next class, be rest assured that the reason I'm responding is at least 2 or 3 other people have asked the question as well. And if it sounds like you're being called out, you're really not. I'm just responding to the question because you've said something that I realize I need to address for everybody to benefit. And so I don't want people to feel uncomfortable about that. If I'm showing your images, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about it. If I'm talking about it when I'm critiquing in relation to the assignment, and I'm making comments in relationship to other things that we've discussed in the class. I'm not, this is not a political debate where I'm trying to dredge out all the nasty stuff in your background. We're just talking about it as a discrete item. One thing that I learned as well is that if your item is up on the screen and people are talking about it really nice, our tendency, of course, is to kind of duck our heads a little bit and pretend it's not us, or to say, oh, no, I could have done better. Don't do that. When you acknowledge that your work, yes, your work is really good, and that's why people are talking about it, the proper way to respond, whatever class you're in, is if anybody notices that it's yours, you say thank you and you smile. Because the fact that they are liking your work in front of everybody just validates your skill. And there's absolutely no reason you should never deprecate yourself, be self-deprecating in that. And you should also never be really snotty about it either. The proper way, anytime somebody compliments you, the proper way to react is always to say thank you. Unless you're trying to make people irritated at you. All right. Next thing is I want to go through, and on this, please look at these images and feel free to chime in and talk about them as well. What are the good things that they're doing? What are the things that could be done better? So these are images from the assignment where people have turned in photos of their house. All right, so here's the first one we're looking at. One of the things that I really like about this is what this person turned in is that the images are from very different perspectives and points of view. Like on a Christmas tree branch limb, this looks like it's probably on a counter somewhere, on a piano, on another table somewhere, like maybe a bedroom dresser top or something, on the balcony of around the stairs or the railing around the stairs. That's one thing I really do appreciate, that there are different settings and they're different facing the camera. One of the things that there were a couple instances where somebody, I don't know if you remember last week we were talking about this specifically, where I was saying the thing not to do is to set it down and then walk around it to take different photos. We can look at this and each one is on a different plane, different material. So we know that these are 5 different setups. And there were a couple assignments that were turned in where there were 2 photos of the same setup and the person just changed the position of where they were standing a little bit. And like we talked about at the very beginning, that's not what we're going for. Do you remember I told you about the person who set up a little vignette and then they just walked and took photos from 5 different spots walking around the house? Do you guys remember that? That we're not going to do that here. So each one needs to be a unique setup, and that's one thing that this person does really good. One thing that we did talk about as well is trying to do a lot of texture in it. If you're going to use windows, use a translucent material, trying to get texture in the object. Now this is constructed, so it looks really solid, but this is an example where it would have been a lot of fun to see like a heavier texture on the roof. One thing that I've seen some people do is just use strips and then they overlap the strips going down so that it looks kind of like shingles. That would have been really nice to see in something like that. This one, I think if we look at this house, this person went all out. I mean, this looks like a really well constructed house, and it looks like they had a lot of fun applying texture, different materials on it. I think that this one is very successful for that. And then we look at the different setups, like this one, there's a light on the inside of it. Here's one at the base of a tree. Here's one in a field. Another one with the light is on the inside of it. And then kind of a isomorphic view. Oops, I'm sorry. I don't know, you guys probably still see that, but the screen for me disappeared. I really appreciate this because they've done a good job making very interesting texture. The house is a fun design. I like the stilts. And they did several things so that each photo feels like a very different photo. I like this where the perspective is very distorted. This is kind of a fun one. The snow is melting. Now this one we can say, oh, that's similar. Well, yeah, it is kind of similar. The light is on, but in this one right here, it's a field of snow that's pretty flat, and then in this one, with the light is also on, it's a very different setup. The snow is melting. You see the grass through it, and you see a fence behind it. So we know that they didn't just walk around and the same setup. And I like this perspective too. That this is kind of fun getting different views and everything. Have you guys gone through the discussion and looked at the different houses that people have been turning in? What is your overall view about the different houses? What are some of the things that you've noticed?
For me, just the variety. I was kind of surprised. Like there was a lighthouse. There was one with a garage that was open. They'd made a car. It just the variety was really fun to see that we all had the same prompt, but we came up with completely different um, models, sculptures.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think is really fascinating. I mentioned I get excited every time I teach this class because all of you come from a very different artistic background. Even if two of you are graphic designers, even if two of you are or three of you are digital painters, each of you have been doing it long enough. You have your own individual style, you have your own individual intents when you do your work, and it's really fun to see that. Yeah, everybody has the exact same prompt, everybody has the same parameters to work with, but each one is very different. And I really like that. Another thing I've noticed is that the people that really embraced the applying critique to three other students did a really good job. And some of you haven't done that yet. That's not a big deal. Uh, Sometimes you have to wait until several people actually upload their images, and then you go back a little bit later to make comments on things. And so if you've gotten half points because you haven't uploaded your comments yet, again, email me as soon as you do, so we can take care of that. But yeah, one thing that I really appreciate is you guys are thinkers as well. So when you take the time to talk about somebody else's work, you actually take the time to communicate what you're thinking about it. And I really appreciate that. And on this assignment, everybody needed to respond to the work of three other students. One person, actually, several people have commented on each of the five photos for somebody else's work, and you don't necessarily have to do that. The prompt is to write three specific things, 15 words for each thing, and that's all you need to do about their work. And so I really appreciate the people that did write, responding to each and every one of the five images. That's really nice to see. I This is something else that doesn't really fit into what I've outlined to do today, but I think it's really important to talk about. Have you guys ever heard of a dude named Phil Talbot? He was a photographer right smack dab in the middle of the 19th century. I'd be surprised if you did. He wrote a book called The Pencil of Nature. At this time, I've read a lot of nonsense. Um, I'm not going to categorize it completely as full absolute nonsense, but there are a lot of people that talk about how photography is not an art. And in the 19th century, uh, the art of the 19th century, we moved very quickly from romanticism and realism for the first part of the century. In the US, that translated into the Hudson River School. And then that morphed into Impressionism, which opened up the door for Fauvism and Expressionism, and then the explosion of different movements of the 20th century. And there have been several people that said, well, that's because artists were trying to differentiate themselves from photographers because they wanted people to realize they were artists. Well, first off, photography is a medium just like any other medium of art. And absolutely everything can be a medium for art. Um, so the and Mr. Talbot, one thing I really appreciate about what he was doing, his book, every chapter talks about a different aspect of how photography can be used as a medium for art. Uh, you guys know that you've seen 19th century photographs. Everybody looks really angry. They look unpleasant, and the rationale behind that is everybody was in harnesses, and they had to stay totally still for a while as the glass plate gel, the gel on the glass plate was developing. Well, that's really not true. Um, Aaron, you smile consistently and you hold the smile for about 3 minutes at a time. That it's not a hard thing to do. And Brittany, you do too. It's not that big of a deal. So what is I can't remember his name. He's considered the father of documentary photojournalism in Great Britain. Before he did that, around 1880 or so, he took a trip to Southeast Asia and into China, and he was photographing all these people, and on the other side of the world. He had a lab that was a photo lab that was small enough he could put it in essentially something the size of a horse trailer today, and he was documenting people in Southeast Asia and China through photography. And one of his photographs, several of his photographs, have people smiling while they're eating. And I read an article by a really, I don't know, I don't want to say anything too derogatory, but it's when if you are purporting to be an art historian, you really need to do your due diligence and spend at least 17 minutes on research. And this person was saying, "Oh yeah, he was just promoting the racial stereotype of the smiling Chinese subservient person," and because his photos, people were laughing around tables, they were smiling while they were eating and doing all this kind of stuff. The reality is, the people in the West were frowning because photography was the new medium for portraiture. You went from egg tempera for Greek and Egyptian funerary portraits. You that translated into encaustic and then later oil. And everybody is in their portraiture. You look so serious and stuff because it's it's an important occasion. You're investing a lot of energy into this, and so when people started doing photo portraits of folks, uh, they were holding still and frowning because this is the first opportunity a lot of these people had to pose for a portrait of any nature. And because of all the serious portraits they'd seen, that's what they thought you did. What's different from Western culture though about that when you go over into Southeast Asia? What's the one thing that's really different there in regards to portraiture? In Southeast Asia and China, they did not have 1,000 years of that tradition at all. Portraiture was usually something that you also did as book illustration. And this was a slice of life kind of illustration of everyday ordinary life with children playing, people laughing around. So they did not have that same culturally overall, they did not have that same serious gravitas associated with human portraiture that the Europeans and the Americans did. And so you'd hold a pose for 2 minutes smiling or pretending you're talking to your friends, and that was totally fine because they were the people that he was photographing were drawing from their own cultural experiences about depictions of the human form in portraiture in their traditions, which slice of life genre type of depictions, people laughing, children playing, things like that. So it's very interesting, and it just really bothered me that somebody would say, "Oh, he's perpetrating the racial stereotype." Well, the racial stereotype that they were talking about didn't really start showing up until political cartoon. Still started showing up in political cartoons starting about 1890, 1892, moving forward to about World War II. So that was after this guy was doing all of his photos in the late 1800s in Southeast Asia. So it just stuff like that just baffles me. You know, do your research. And I don't remember what started that tirade entirely. Oh no, I was talking about art as a medium. Sorry, again, brain Pachinko machine. AI is remarkable. You know, the first real artwork in the digital medium, I would argue, would be the movies Last Starfighter and Tron in the mid 80s. That was the first time that really hardcore, good, solid digital animation was ever used in cinematic presentation. Last Starfighter, the Starflower fight scene that's right towards the end of the movie, all of that was digital animation, and nobody had ever seen it before. You know, and then we get things like, I don't know if you guys have seen Akira or Steam Boy or any of the Studio Ghibli movies. Um, a lot of that is really powerful digital animation. Moving forward a little bit, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow was the first cinematic feature that was done in a green screen room where all the action takes place, all the set pieces, everything is digital. And then the next really big one was the movie 300. You know, and so those kinds of things really demonstrate that that is an art form. You know, digital, and then of course the next step from that is AI, and AI is also a legitimate tool. It's a medium for artistic expression. However, and I highly recommend that you use AI in the work that you do. Get used to it. It's not going to go away. Um, However, there are some things to keep in mind when you do this. First, your work must be in your voice. So you don't turn in AI stuff. You don't have AI write your essays and write your things for you and then just turn that in, because then you're having somebody else do your work for you and you are pretending that somebody else's work is your own, and that is cheating. But when I use AI to do formatting, layout, line up all my ducks, you know, get everything, um, do the outline for something, and then I'll go through and change it to my voice. You know, it's gotten the ideas out there, and then I change it to my voice. The reason why I say this is when I get an essay written by somebody, and in the middle of it, it says, I'm an AI program. All I can do is extrapolate data. I cannot venture an opinion as to this art being better than anybody else's. You know, that's, you know, a little bit of a giveaway that the person did not read it over and apply their own voice to it. So I recommend heartily use AI in the stuff that you do. Um, find out first the policy of your instructor, but use AI in what you do, but always take the responsibility, go through it and change it to your own voice. All right. Does everybody get that? That's what I was leading up to, babbling on about photography as a medium. Should say the most photographed celebrity in the whole world was Frederick Douglass in the 19th century. And he said that photography was a God-given miracle that allowed everyone the same right that used to be afforded only to kings, queens, and heads of state. And it allowed you to create a permanent and immortalized record of you in the way that you want the world to see you. Isn't that beautiful? And it's absolutely no surprise to me that after the Civil War, uh, one of the fastest growing cottage industries in the northern states was black-owned businesses where they would had photo studios. And we get a lot. There is a lot of documentation about happy family life of black families in the northern U.S. because of these studios. And a big part of that, I think, is Frederick Doug because of Frederick Douglass. Remarkable, amazing, absolutely astounding person. Anyway, blah blah blah. You guys aren't going to remember any of that. So that's fine. Okay. I am going now. Do you guys have any questions about what I said regarding AI or anything like that? Another thing that I've noticed, if you are if you're using AI to do your annotated bibliography and stuff like that, I don't necessarily have a problem with that as long as, again, you go through it, change it to your voice. One thing that you need to do, though, is double check all your citation sources. Wikipedia does not count at all, ever. Why?
Everybody can change it. There's no control on it.
Yeah, there's no gatekeeping. However, Wikipedia is very important to use as a research tool. What is the benefit of Wikipedia as a research tool? If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of every Wikipedia article, they have all the links and citations that the person used. The ones that are usable, a lot of the times, can help you in your research. But because there is no gatekeeping, there's absolutely no way of knowing how accurate the person is in those articles. And if you doubt that at all, up anything about things like Soviet science, because those are all classified as pseudoscientific science, or not all, but most of them are classified as pseudoscience, even though uh, there are things that are validated and proven. And anything under Nikola Tesla, who developed the alternating current that we use today in our homes, that really generated the pop culture music on a C-sharp scale. That's all because of Nikola Tesla, who is supposedly a pseudoscience scientist, according to Wikipedia. So, they don't get it all right, always right. But anyway, um, what I was trying to get to, until my brain hijacked my mouth, was do not uh, do not use the citations that ChatGPT or any AI program gives you without verifying them, because ChatGPT is not really a research tool. It is it samples statistical word use on the internet, and that's what it does. That's how the programs are designed to function. They look up the statistical probabilities and expressions of word combinations on the internet, and so there's no research really going on. What it is showing you is these ideas show up next to each other in the internet. And so when you have a citation that is generated by AI, it's actually going to show you this is what it would look like if it was valid. And so use something like, I like MyBib. Grammarly is something like that. You can go into your browser of choice and type in something like free online MLA citation generator, and it will give you a dozen different options for free ones, where you can plug in the URL from the website you visited to get your information, and it will generate an MLA formatted citation for you. And I like those. Those are also AI, but they are AI with the specific parameters that they will only generate citations with the information that you give them. So they're going to be accurate. And with those, you also need to remember always add at the end of it the accessed on date phrase. And does anybody know why we do that with the internet?
It's because it can be updated. And so if you know where, like when the information was coming, if it gets updated, you know that you have more current information.
Yeah, that's right. And you can use something like the Wayback Machine or archive.net and find what that page looked like on the date and time that you originally accessed it. Uh, there's a guy named Richard Hoagland. Have you guys ever heard of Richard Hoagland? I'm hoping not, because you look fairly normal. Um, Richard Hoagland was a NASA consultant in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And one of the things that he noticed was photos coming back from the surface of Mars and then later with the surface of the moon. It looked like they were intelligently constructed features, buildings on the surface of Mars and the surface of the moon. And then he since also found what looked like intelligently constructed structures in the rings of Saturn and other places in the solar system. What does that have to do with anything? Well, kind of hoping that there's alien life out there. That'd be awesome. But the important thing is he started noticing right away as NASA would release imagery, um, their digitized images on their website. If anything showed up when they were originally released, and anybody said anything about it, within 24 hours, it would be replaced by a different image, where it would be the same image and something obviously would be airbrushed out, or it would be a completely different image. And that's when he started making the connection with uh, uh, the fact that anything that's uploaded to the internet is going to be there perpetually as long as you can access the date of that uploading. And that's why we do the accessed on. And now you have a great story to deflect attention from yourself when somebody asks you at a family gathering, yeah, you're an artist, but what are you going to do for money? And then you can pull out the Richard Hoagland story. Because if you can't win people over with rational arguments, baffling them is the next best thing. And that should be something you write down in your notes. All righty. Now this is the next module. And I want to just go through this. We're just going to go through the module. Probably not going to talk about the quiz very much. I'll let you guys do that. If you, we can look through it and talk about a couple of the answers. One thing I can tell right away is that a lot of you have access to the book, and I see that in the caliber of your answers. All the answers from the quiz are directly lifted from the textbook. So if there's something in it, say, refer to the text or whatever, just go back to the textbook and you will find the answer. And there in every quiz, there's at least 2 or 3 ringer questions where you answer it one way if you do research on the internet, and you answer it correctly if you refer to the textbook. So, but anyway, what we're doing next in module 2 is defining volumetric form with line. And this is really an interesting thing. We have several different artists that do different kinds of approaches to this, but it's all about expressing three-dimensional form with what is essentially a scribble. And I love this kind of wire work. Have you guys seen, there are a number of different videos on YouTube. I love messing with my kids' heads. I like saying the YouTube, and they just slap their foreheads. Oh, Dad, you're so outdated. But I do that specifically to irritate them. Anyway, there are several artists in India that started doing this, and it's really fantastic, where they'll take rebar and the video, they're very short videos where they'll look at the structure from one side where you'll see the scribble line and it looks like a head of an elephant. And then they'll pan around, you kind of lose sight of the elephant. And when they're 90 degrees around, walking around the object, suddenly you'll see it's a portrait of something else. Have you guys seen those? There's several really, really good ones. And I love that kind of thing. But what we're talking about is basically taking a scribble, a gesture drawing, and turning it into 3 dimensions. I think that this is a beautiful one with this deer, because you see this little scribble. It looks like really harsh bent wire, and then it gets more and more solid, tighter scribbles until the hooves and the head are pretty much solid pieces. Where you get a form like this, which is a very human form with really tightly laced, colorful cables. And I love the fact that there's this, spatter of colors against the wall around it, but then everything unravels as you go down towards the feet. I think that that's really great. One of the artists that does this kind of thing that I love is Anthony Gormley. He's great at this kind of a thing. And then this is closer to the kind of work that we're looking for in this assignment, where you start off with you want to do like a gestural scribble of something, and then use the wire in your kit to make a 3-dimensional form of that. I am not looking for any of you guys to do something like this or something like that. And these I think are really interesting. They are in 3D, but they're really simple. And this, I could argue that this doesn't necessarily have to be 3D. It looks like it's more 2D. Something like this, I think, is really interesting. But as we go through this, uh, there are a number of artists that have very different ways of approaching this. So I want to share a couple of these guys with you. These videos, oh, by the way, I really appreciate it when people tell me a link isn't working anymore, because then I can go back through and find a better link that actually gets to what I want to share with you. Alexander Calder is a guy that really kind of defined uh, op art movement. Um, he's one of the artists that really did that, but he's also contemporary with people like Marcel Duchamp, and so he did work over several decades, and he played around with some really fun ideas. Um, a lot of stuff like you would normally associate with artists like Moreau, for example. But one of the things he did, and one of these videos, is he made these little simple wire sculptures, and then he would do a performance with them. And that's what Calder's Circus is about. And some of his things are really very simple, uh, like his wire portraits that he did, but they're really fun to look at. With you guys, if you we'll talk about it more in just a second, but remember, for this assignment, it needs to be using the wire to replace your pencil lead or pen line and bringing that scribble into three-dimensional space. So you're working with a volume rather than just doing a standalone drawing that is on a plane. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Calder is really kind of fun because he adds kinetic energy into his simple wire work. Ruth Asawa is astounding. Her stuff is really amazing. I want to see if we can get to this. So she's making things where she links the wire together, and when you stand back, you think, "Oh yeah, that's nice." Then when you get up close, you realize, "Holy crap! There's a lot of work that goes into this." So this thing right here is kind of a vase-like structure that's about 5 feet tall, and it's about 2 feet in diameter. And look at how tiny these links are. They're not really true links. She's wrapping the wire around and bending it a little bit so that it links up with the previous line of wire that she did. But everything is done so that it looks like it's a chain link fence kind of thing. And her stuff is just astounding, because he has that spirograph kind of feel to it. But what's so cool about it is that as you walk around her pieces or look at them, where the different uh, layers of chain link wire kind of interact with each other or overlap each other, you get this really fascinating um, play with density that I think is almost magical. I mean, these things are obviously wire sculpture, but something like this starts looking almost like watercolor, color field watercolor, where they're overlapping shapes and forms. And some of these things, in addition to the wire sculpture, see, it looks like she's sculpting the shadow as well. And I think stuff like that is absolutely amazing. So Anthony Gormley is one of the other artists that I mentioned. A lot of his stuff has to do with human forms, and a lot of his stuff will use different materials to address human forms. So you get an object like this that is just blocks of wood, but he's put it together so that the outline is a human silhouette. I think stuff like that is really amazing. And he'll do things with um, sometimes on these cement pieces or cast pieces, he'll do things that the human form is actually inside and you can only see it in the holes there. But then he starts doing things with bent wire and stuff. I think this one is with wood, but he'll do these really interesting structures that play with density of the material, just like Ruth Asawa does. And then you can also see where the human form fits in. And these are all block structures, but as we go through his stuff, you'll see more and more of like this is uh, square bar that he's made into these forms, and then you see this is just wire that he's formed into different cubes and lined them up, and they always have references to the human form one way or another. And then stuff like this is absolutely astounding to me, where it looks like a almost a probability cloud, where it's denser on the inside and then kind of fades out as you step away. And, or stuff like this, where this is interesting because yeah, he's using wire, but the human form is generated because of the intersections of all these sticks, these straight lines. Isn't that fascinating? Pretty wild stuff. And Jaime Plensa, I I really like his stuff too. Very interesting things where he plays with those ideas of density. You know, where your eye creates the form as you spot where the different planes intersect, and he'll do these three-dimensional things where the features, if you're looking at it from one perspective, it almost disappears because there's not an awful lot of overlap. But as you walk around it, you'll see the densities in face and features and things like that, and you realize what the structure is. And he uses, instead of just wire like these two, he also uses um, like die scrap, where it goes to factories where they've cut dies out and have leftover pieces or even metal letters and stuff like that, and he'll use those structures to generate the different planes, intersecting planes. A lot of very cool stuff. And they start because he's very aware of what the tricks of the eye pulls on your brain, with the different layers of density and stuff like that. He can generate these sculptures that start to feel like holograms, and I think it's pretty interesting. And I really like David Oliveira. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like the website that I've given you is down. Um, I don't know why, but definitely check out the videos because David Oliveira does really fascinating things with um, human forms, animals, different types of things like that, where he uses different densities of wire to generate different textures, uses different ways of bending the wire, putting it together in different layers and overlaps. So you get a lot of really fascinating stuff again going on. So definitely watch those. And then again, the artist review is all about the artists that you reference are the six artists that are in that background uh, portion of the module. That's really important, and I'm probably going to say it several times because I have taught this class where I thought everybody understood that after the first month of me repeating it, and then the third artist review that people did, several people just started pulling artists out of the hat, which really is not the assignment. So for this assignment, what you're going to be doing is beginning with picking something. And this, you'll notice all these four gesture drawings, scribble drawings are animals. It doesn't have to be an animal. It could be anything that is identifiable as a discrete object. So animals are fun to do. I would probably stay away from portraying a sticker because that's just going to be flat. But people have done hot air balloons, bird cages, human organs, all sorts of stuff. It doesn't have to be an animal. But one thing that you'll notice that's consistent with all these drawings is that people were being very aware as they were sketching this out. They were being very aware of what wire potentially could do. So developing density by making the lines next tight, either overlapping or next to each other, doing interesting texture with the line. And this is pretty much, these are just gesture drawings. But can you imagine how cool it would be if you just did exactly this gesture drawing with using just the wire? And that's essentially what we're doing. Um, and we are activating a volume of space by beginning with this gesture drawing, scribbled drawing that we're doing, and making that in wire so it fills a volume. And I have to talk about that, and say that because what I've seen is people will do, for example, flowers and leaves. Those are problematic right off the bat because people will do them, will be thinking about using the wire to make a flat sketch, and we don't want to do that. If you're going to make a leaf, look at leaves that have volume to them. And if the leaves you are addressing are flat, do several of them and have them come off a central branch at different angles, or do several of them and combine them into one leaf. So it looks almost like a leaf ball or something like that. If you're going to be doing flowers, pay attention to the dimensionality of the blossom itself. Flower blossoms are not flat; they have volume to them. If you're going to do that, make several of them and put them in a vase. That way if you're going to be doing using flowers for your gesture drawing out of wire, make several of them and make it a bouquet. Do different kinds of flowers. It's really important. Again, I'm stressing this. You need to activate a volume of space. This is a three-dimensional project. So going down here, we can see. And so step 2 is create your piece. That's where you use your wire. And if you have additional wire, use that. If you need more wire, go to a place like Harbor Freight or FFA and get more wire and add to it. Whatever you want to do. The real big thing to be aware of is that this shouldn't have to be bigger than something like a volleyball, or a little bit smaller. It should be bigger than a softball. Volleyball is probably about the size that we want. Okay. And when I think the size restriction, I talk a little bit bigger in here, and that's fine if you have access to the wire, but most of you are not going to. There's nothing though that says you can't go and pull out the beading wire from your kit at home, or finding some bending wire that you can pick up at Harbor Freight, which would be really cheap, or anything like that. I mean, that would be just absolutely fine. If you are going to be using that, or when you do use the wire, please make sure that you wear gloves, that you don't care whether they get dirty. A lot of wire is covered with either oil or carbon, like basically lamp black, to keep it from rusting. And so your hands are going to get really dirty. I also recommend very strongly that, like Aaron, like Brittany, and like me, you wear some sort of eye protection when you do this, because it will flip around and get in your eyeballs if you don't. Gloves are also there to protect your hands. You've seen the Abravanel Hall stained glass or glass blown chandelier. Have you guys seen that? It has a lot of these glass blown pieces that are attached around a central shape using stainless steel wire. It's about 18 gauge stainless steel wire. I know that because I put together several of these around Salt Lake Valley, Utah County. And it is very startling when you're working with this kind of wire, trying to feed it through stuff. It doesn't go right where you want, and it ends up sticking into your finger. It is profoundly startling when the place that it sticks into your finger is like right around your fingernail. That becomes incredibly sensitive. So I would recommend going to Dollar Tree, getting a cheap pair of gardening gloves and wearing that, so that when you're all done with the whole project, you can throw it away. And it will minimize the risk of um, damaging your money makers, your fingers. But look at these examples. I really like, these are really pretty good examples of what we're talking about. And you see this pair of shoes, the person knew they didn't have an awful lot of wire, so they didn't do a lot of detail. But look at how where they or the kind of decision making that they used to pick out the detail that they wanted to emphasize. It looks like these are sneakers. It looks like they're kind of old school sneakers with the white, the 1 inch rim, around the edge, and you can kind of see that with how they built that up here. And look also at how they did different kinds of fun things with the line. Here they did a tight wrap to give one kind of texture. Here they did a loose wrap, kind of calling to mind the laces. Uh, different textures like that really make this feel fun. And this teddy bear, it looks like something like, was it Several Nights at Freddy's or whatever? That it looks kind of disturbing as a teddy bear. But what's fascinating to me about it is if we look at it a little bit closer, you can see how they use the wire, different ways of using the wire to generate different textures and different uh, activations of volume. Like these arms look almost like sausages because you'll notice that they have a couple lines that kind of define the overall shape of the arm. And then they used a coiling technique where all the coils are about the same diameter. And that really kind of fleshes out the arm without making it solid. They did something similar with the legs. But another thing that you'll notice is they chose to use where on this original teddy bear the actual seams are. And that's where they overlap the wires. And I think it's fascinating. We're right here. They use short bits of wire with a lot of energy to it to kind of mimic that stitching. For the ears are really simple. For the eyes, they did 3 or 4 loops of the wire that are the same size. It really emphasizes the eyes. But it's just fun to me to see that they use several different techniques to generate texture for the wire lines. But see, again, they're activating a volume of space. This one is Popeye, and this is kind of a fun picture. In real life, it's vaguely disturbing, but this is kind of a fun way of using the wire different ways to give different textural qualities to the lines that are generated. And here's an AT-AT walker. Um, rather simple design, but again, the space is activated, and where you expect there to be a lot more mechanics, they've kind of tightened up the wire coils and stuff right here. There's different textural uses, different concentrations of the wire for different areas. This is kind of a fun thing. You'll also notice that all of these are standing by themselves, and that's important too. If you're going to do a figure like this kind of thing, just keep fiddling with the wire until it balances by itself, and then you can take a photo of it. So where it's under its own power. I really like this one. This looks like kind of the sock horse doll that my mom and I made when I was like in kindergarten. Kind of a really fun floppy thing, floppy toy. This bird cage, I I don't think that this is as successful as these other ones. And the reason why is this bottom is really interesting. There's a lot going on here, but you look at this part of the cage and there's really nothing much going on there. If you did something like this, it would be more fun to, yeah, do all this, spend time with the bird, maybe make this a little bit more substantial, and then use a different kind of wire looping around here so that this kind of cage area is more activated. And I think that could potentially work. And then I love this fish. This fish from the nose to right here is about 16 inches, 15, 16 inches long. I love how they did this for the eyes. That seems like a very Alexander Calder kind of thing to do. I love the different ways that they made the fin textures, the gills, all that kind of stuff. Is this kind of making sense? Is this giving you ideas of how to use the wire to activate that volume? I think that it turns out really good. Now, as looking at that module, You'll also see that after you turn in your photo of the wire sculpture that you make, and I don't know why I stopped the screen sharing. Probably because I got bored. Um, there's not an awful lot of teachers that manage to drive themselves to sleep in their own lecture, but I'm working on it. You'll also notice after you turn in the wire sculpture, there is this share your volumetric form with line. This is just a simple discussion. And what you're going to be doing is just posting an image of your work, and that's it. Once you do that, I'll see it. I'll give you the 5 points. The reason why this is important is that if we were meeting together, everybody would be able to see your work. And if we go back to the modules, so that's one reason why it's important. This way you can share your work with everybody. When we go back here to applying the tools of artistic critique, one of the assignments is to critique your own work, and then another assignment is somebody else's work. Every time we do a project, there's only 3 that you're going to really have to respond to in comments. All the rest, you're just going to be posting it so everybody can see it. And one of the main reasons is so that you can have several different things to choose from when you do your artist critique on somebody else's work. And then when you do that critique, you're going to make a video where you're sharing the screen of just that art object image, and then talking about it and recording your voice talking about it. Let's see. Hold on a second. I'm fiddling. Okay. This is one of the reasons why when you take photos and document your work to submit it, you need to do it in front of an infinity screen, which is either going to be white tag board or a white sheet that you set up. Because we don't want, and then again, you'll make the object so it can stand up by itself. We don't want to see your hand holding it up or anything like that. We want to have a really good photo image of it that you do, because it shows respect for your own work, and it's a good way to present yourself professionally. And B, we want consistent backgrounds so that the work itself is emphasized, that when you go through looking for an object to critique, you will have something that is a solid image that you can critique. And I just want you to get in the habit of respecting your own work enough that you take a good quality image of it. You should respect your own work. You should respect the work that you've made yourself. You put enough time into it that you should recognize it has value. This leads me to something else. Each of the modules that we have should represent at least 10 hours of your time, the project itself. And so when I see somebody does a work log and they only spent 2.5 hours making their house, photographing it, putting it up online, or whatever the project is, there is always a direct one-to-one correlation between time spent and value of the grade. If you are doing something, one of these projects, and it says it should take 8 to 10 hours to put it together, and you spent 3 hours and you think you're done, there's a couple things that you need to do right away. One is value your own energy and time. You're taking this class, you're paying money for this class, you should get something out of this class. And part of that is going through and doing the exercises. Another is remember that there is a correlation between grade and integrity of work and the time spent on the work. So if everybody else is spending 10 to 14 hours and you're spending 2, go back and address it again. Go back and work on it again. Do something else. It may be that you'll have to step away from it for a day and then go back to it and work on it again. And sometimes that's the only way that I can do stuff, where I'll work on it an hour and a half at a time, come back, a couple hours later, work on it again, work on it some more. But it's important to do that and uh, respect the fact that it should be taking you 8 to 10 to 14 hours to make this thing. I think if you don't value your own identity as an artist enough to put the time in that it requires, um, you're really not going to learn an awful lot. And this class is intended uh, for you to learn, essentially. There's something else that's going on too. I mentioned at the very beginning that you guys are going to get headaches. If you're a 2D artist, you are going to get headaches in this course, because this course is designed to help you, uh, if you're a 2D artist especially, to help you really engage the 3D aspects of your creative mind. And in order to do that, we have to create new neuronic pathways, which sometimes can give you headaches. It can be painful. But new neuronic pathways only happen when you engage a certain process of thinking in your brain repeatedly. And that begins to happen after you do that for at least 25 to 35 minutes. And so, we're talking neuroscience right now. I'm eminently qualified in that field because I teach art. But what is going on physically inside of your brain, if when you start working on something for a prolonged period of time, you are building new neuronic pathways. Your brain is physically changing and adapting as you learn this new process of thinking, so that you can do a better job with it later on. And it also impacts everything from how you perceive the world around you to how you begin to express yourself, or how you express yourself. So it is really important to engage this part of your brain for this class, you know, um, so that you learn those elements that you need to. What is fascinating to me about this class is, by the end of it, um, for our final, one of the things that we'll talk about is, how is this does this impact the other things that you do? And what's really interesting is, I've had people that are medical professionals go through the class, and they say the tools of artistic critique help them as they solve problems with active patients. And it's interesting as well that all the digital artists, all the graphic designers, all the painters have said that in their work by the end of the semester, it has changed markedly, so that other professors recognize their two-dimensional work is changing, because they are thinking about volume and space and 3D in a very different way. And it's not because they have a different vocabulary necessarily, it's because their brains are actually physically changing and learning these, or developing new neuronic pathways as they learn these principles and exercise them. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Do any of you have questions about this next assignment, this next module that we're working on? We're going to talk about it again next week. Um, and hopefully, if you have questions about the quizzes or anything like that, hit me up and we'll talk more about it next week. But I didn't see any hands, but does anybody have any questions about any of the material we covered today? All right, Aaron.
Is it working?
Okay, it's working now.
Okay. I questioned the person that I chose as my artist selection for the big project that we're doing for the semester. If we chose to switch and it was just to somebody that hadn't already been taken, is that allowed?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think it really matters,
Okay.
because I've actually seen less. I've seen less people interested in even approaching the idea of cheating or bumming off of somebody else's work at UVU than most of the other schools I've been to. So that's not really a factor. And I do think it's fascinating, if two people will do the same artist, it doesn't matter. Even if you're in the same room while you're working on it, you are both going to approach it in a very different way. So I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, if you want to switch, I think that'll be just fine. If you want to go back and resubmit that art, update it to your new artist selection, that'd be great. I appreciate, Aaron, you talking about that, because that reminds me of something else. Every semester, there's one person that picks a different artist out of their ear for every one of those 4 artist research elements of the project. And it baffles me because it's pretty clear to me. Well, I think it's pretty clear. You pick one in 7.A, and then you stay with that for all the others, 7.B, 7.C, 7.D. And it needs to be from that list of 75 artists. That seems really clear to me. Is it clear to you guys? Okay, because I have, like last year, somebody was really irritated that they weren't getting good grades on these things because, like I said, they picked a different artist for each of the projects. And that kind of baffles me. What we're doing is you're exploring what makes that artist unique, why you resonate with it, with that person in 7A. In 7B, you're doing research about that artist and finding out more about them, finding out how to research about them. In 7C, you're going to be doing a presentation where you talk about what you learned in that research that you did. So if you do 7B, 7C is not that difficult. And then 7D, you're giving an opinion about all the stuff that you discovered regarding that artist. So each of these exercises built on the previous one. And so having a different artist for each one seems really kind of silly. But also, the more projects I'm sorry, the subsequent projects that you do are going to draw you and differentiate you away from somebody else who chose the same person. That really does. I know I said that it needs to be somebody different, but especially when we don't have a lot of contact in a class like this, it'll be just fine. So that is a perfect example of what my dad called using 20 words when one would do. The answer should have been, yeah, sure, go ahead. But instead, I had to drag it out for a while. Any
No
other
worries,
questions?
thanks.
So that was a good question. Any other questions about the stuff that we talked about? I really appreciate the fact that you guys are paying attention when you're taking the quizzes. There are some questions in there about like French when he did the Lincoln Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, and about the golden section. What is that rate? What is that proportion? And or the golden ratio. Those are things that I can tell you guys are reading in the textbook, and that's great. And if you don't read in the textbook, it's obvious because the answer is missed. But one of the questions has to do with, and I don't remember if it's this quiz 1 or quiz 2. Are the principles of art defining principles that have to be followed, or are they guidelines? And it doesn't really matter how you answer that as long as you're able to justify or articulate your answer. The golden section is one of these things that is literally hardwired into the human body. I say that because the golden section, the ratio is 1 to 1.618, which is about 3 to 5. And what is fascinating to me, if we look around the artwork, the visual imagery that we respond to, the sounds that we respond to, the sounds that we find pleasant, the rhythms that we enjoy, the movies we like watching, the things we like experiencing, almost all the time, the things that we have enjoyable experiences around are related somehow to that ratio. Pleasing sounds, nice chords, regardless of what scale they're in, are related directly to the golden ratio. There's a guy named Pythagoras, which some people believe is a swear word. It's not. The Pythagoreans were a group of Greek mystics that started thinking about, if the divine represents the ultimate, the ultimate good, the ultimate beauty, whatever, then there should be ways to associate ourselves or to resonate with that idea of the ultimate, especially if there is a divine presence that invites humanity to connect with them. And what they came up with that I think is really beautiful is there we can find that divine connection in our observations of beauty around us. And that beauty can be found in ratios. And they recognize that these ratios keep showing up in the things that human forms respond to positively. What's fascinating to me is when those ratios are manifested in um, auditory frequencies, bones will knit faster, skin will heal quicker. A baby, when the baby first opens its eyes, one of the ways it um, relieves stress and feels comfort is by recognizing, uh, and it's almost always, believe it or not, it's almost always the face of its mother as it relates to golden ratio proportions. In the mid 90s, when different universities around the country, MIT, UCLA, were contacted and asked to start developing databases that ended up into facial recognition. One of the projects they did was took samplings of just random individuals, and then they started thinking, like, I wonder what it would look like if people were averaged using the distance between their pupils as the static points for reference. And what they found in these different, and they did it with facial recognition, but they also did it with body measurements. What they found is the golden ratios that people like Praxiteles used he was creating or defining what the Renaissance referenced as ultimate beauty in the human form, but he was creating it in relationship to how the Pythagoreans used the ratios to develop a perfect godly human form. And where the golden ratio is illustrated by the distance of that first phalange on your finger to the second one. This is 1.618. This is 1. This is 1.618 to this being 1. That it's a golden section ratio. The width of your hand to the height of your hand is the same thing. How your face is laid out is the same thing. Humans, we fall generally into an aggregate of an expression of the golden ratio, but we don't precisely fit. But when UCLA and MIT did an average of thousands of people and their facial features and stuff, then and had a computer model that, it matched what Praxiteles and other Greek sculptors had developed with his idealized human form. And I think that's absolutely astounding. There are actually two actors in Hollywood right now that are personifications of that perfect or near perfect golden ratio. They're actually Denzel Washington for the male and Vanessa Williams for the female. Which I think that's pretty amazing. I don't think that if something doesn't fit in the golden ratio, we can't call it art. I think that's absurd. But there are a lot of these tools where we talk about um, art principles, balance, informal, formal balance, things like that. Things like the golden ratio. We should be aware of them. We should learn about them. We should keep them in our tool belt so that if we're working on a project and it's just not gelling, it doesn't fit right, pull those tools out and put it up next to what you've built and see if that's the reason why it's not fitting right. So you use it as a reference point. You don't use it to define. But I say this is hardwired into the human form because our DNA, if you look down the center of the DNA helix, it is a pentagonal reflection around the center point, but that is a manifestation of the golden section folded in on itself. So our very our DNA, the molecules that define how we live in the world, is based on manifestation of the golden section. I just think that's interesting. But it's interesting to me that the golden ratio defines how molecules connect to each other, or atoms connect to each other and form molecules, which defines how chemical reactions are made. It defines how clouds form in the sky. It defines the colors that we see. Um, it defines um, how gravitational bodies react to each other, where they settle in their orbits. It defines how the clouds form on Jupiter. Um, it defines how galaxies spiral. And what's really amazing to me is as NASA maps more and more of the observable universe, as it expands, as our ability to observe the universe expands, what they're noticing is that galaxies do not form into megaclusters or super constellations randomly. They actually form on the apex and edges of a gigantic octahedron that surrounds us in the universe. And the octahedron is one of the platonic solids that is a three-dimensional manifestation of the golden section. So just if you find it too easy to go to sleep tonight, think about that, and it will keep you up for a bit. But anyway, thank you for joining with me. Oh, Polly, I really appreciate. Polly is awesome. I don't know if you guys can see. She has perfect timing, and she'll always do the dad joke laugh whenever she knows I'm looking for a happy response. So thank you, Polly. I really appreciate that. It validates me.
Thank you.
You guys um, have a really good week, a really good weekend. If you have any questions, email me. Let me know what's going on. If you're missing points, go through. If you have questions about that, talk to me. And if you have any questions that you really think the class would benefit from, we'll make sure and talk about that next week as well. But until then, enjoy your week, have a safe weekend, and keep plugging away. You guys are doing great.